West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
An unprecedented campaign of deceit. That is how Special Counsel Jack Smith sums up the plot to overturn the 2020 presidential election, driven by one man and one man only, the ex-president himself. In a flurry of filings on Monday, the special counsel pushing back against Team Trump's efforts to derail the trial in his federal election interference case, and for the very first time, revealing a key plank of their case against Donald Trump. For months now, questions have swirled about how much Donald Trump's state of mind matters in this case. Did he actually believe that the election was stolen from him? And do prosecutors need to show that the ex-president knew he'd lost the election? Well, the Washington Post is now reporting this. The Justice Department weighed in on the debate for the first time, saying that what they need to prove is not that Trump believed the big lie of the election being stolen, but that he knowingly spread associated lies in a criminal scheme to stay in power. From the special counsel's filing, quote, just as the president of a company may be guilty of fraud for using knowingly false statements of facts to defraud investors, even if he subjectively believes that his company will eventually succeed, the defendant may be guilty of using deceit to obstruct the government function by which the results of the presidential election are collected and counted and certified, even if he provides evidence that he subjectively believed that the election was rigged. Prosecutors saying that Trump's words go beyond First Amendment protected speech, as Trump's attorneys claim, because Trump peddled specific false claims about voter fraud in order to commit crimes. Once again, from this remarkable new filing, quote, as the indictment recognizes, the defendant, quote, had a right like every American to speak publicly about the 2020 presidential election and even to claim falsely that there had been outcome determinative fraud during the election and that he had won. Had the defendant done no more, his statements pertaining to political matters of public importance would have remained protected under the First Amendment, even if false. But the defendant did not stop there. Instead, he made dozens of specific claims that there had been substantial fraud in certain states, such as that large numbers of dead, non-resident, non-citizen, or otherwise ineligible voters had cast ballots, or that voting machines had changed votes for the defendant to votes for Biden. The defendant then used those lies as the instruments of his 4 criminal offenses. Now, this argument is just one of many points Jack Smith is making in his push to urge the courts to reject Donald Trump's kitchen sink approach to try to stop the federal election trial before it begins and thwart that case entirely. Prosecutors warning Judge Chutkan of what they say is Trump's, quote, newest delay tactic, his request to stop all proceedings until the courts have weighed in on whether Donald Trump is immune from prosecution because he was president when he tried to reverse his defeat in the 2020 election. The special counsel's office urging Judge Chutkan to prioritize a ruling on this because it may end up before the Supreme Court. They write this, quote, the defendant's actions make clear that his ultimate objective with the stay motion, as has consistently been the case in this and other matters, is to delay trial at all cost and for as long as possible. The special counsel urging the courts to reject Trump's tactics of deceit, all designed to delay this trial, is where we begin today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Former acting U.S. Solicitor General Neil Katyal is here, plus national investigative reporter for the Washington Post, Carol Leonnig, is here, and the editor-at-large for the Bulwark, Charlie Sykes, is here. Charlie, it always felt like Trump's, I think you call it a lizard brain, I've always called it his reptilian survival sense, would inform him that this criminal trial is very dangerous for him. And I don't know if it's his performative meltdowns in the civil fraud trial in New York City, but these filings on Trump's part have a desperation to them, a desperation to not see Trump stand trial for his election interference.
Well, and I think that's obvious. I think it's been the strategy all along, and I think that's been a pattern and practice for Donald Trump. I think you saw the lizard brain in full in New York yesterday, but he has a different set of lawyers in Washington, D.C. He has some grown-ups. And, of course, this is the heart of his strategy, because he knows, I think, that there's a very real chance that he will be convicted of this case. The Judge Chutkan, if she continues to move ahead at the speed and the seriousness with which she has so far, there's a chance that he will be a convicted felon by the time of the Republican convention, when his main hope now is to delay, to obfuscate, to obstruct to the point where this will be pushed past the election. And then the election is all about keeping himself out of jail, and he can make this all go away. So we do have the lizard brain Donald Trump, but also we have the Donald Trump that knows that the only way that he's going to survive this is to push this back as far as possible. And that is not a completely irrational decision on his part, is it?
No, but it certainly makes the indictment in D.C. and the charges and the investigation into January 6th, I think, as important as the four of us have always intuited they would be should this moment come to pass. And I want to press you, Neil Katyal, on the filings themselves. What are we learning about Jack Smith's team and their case from these filings?
Well, I think we learned that Jack Smith's team is professional, competent, analytic, and the like. I think really the thing we're learning is, Nicole, from the Trump team's filings, because they basically threw every argument they could think of against the wall to see what might stick. And what Jack Smith's team did is meticulously sort through this mess, to use, I think, the best descriptive word, and explain why the judge should let this all fall to the floor. I mean, Jack Smith's team picked apart Trump's motions with surgical precision. Just to take one Trump filing, this crazy idea that he is immune from criminal prosecution because he's president. That is an insane concept, as Jack Smith's lawyers pointed out. I mean, if that were true, the president could commit murder or, engage in any number of fraudulent acts to try and, subvert an election, cancel the election entirely. The idea that a president is immune from criminal law is insane. Now, there is an argument that a sitting president, while president, can't be indicted. That's something the Justice Department has believed since 1973. But last I checked, Donald Trump is not a sitting president. And so there is it's an embarrassing filing. And I think Jack Smith called it as much. And what I really like in these filings by Smith is he is calling Trump out on what the strategy is. It is not to win these arguments about absolute immunity or First Amendment or double jeopardy. It's to try and delay the trial, so delay it and try and take an appeal to the Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit and then the U.S. Supreme Court with the hope that that'll delay things. And the U.S. Supreme Court, I don't think, is going to hear these arguments. These are pathetic arguments, to put it mildly.
I want to sort of say this artfully, but Carol Leonnig, there seems to be a benefit, I guess, to going after the Mueller team. I mean, Jack Smith's team's filings suggest they operate in a world that is not hermetically sealed from the political climate. They are clearly cognizant of the My Cousin Vinny legal arguments that may lose in court but prevail in the political arena. And I'm not trying to suggest or posit that Jack Smith is playing in the political arena, but the filings suggest a keen awareness that everything about this trial suggests that Trump's lies polluted both the political arena and at the time the constitutional one, the official proceeding that it thwarted. And I wonder what you make of what we're learning and what is being revealed from Jack Smith's team through the language of these filings.
I think you're picking up on something so subtle and yet so profound about the way Jack Smith is speaking, both through his deputies and through these pleadings. Let's be clear. He is using declarative sentences, and as Neil said, calling out the president for the actual tactic at play here, to delay and delay. It is true that the argument that a president is immune from all laws sounds laughable, and yet it could be, in some respects, Donald Trump's ace in the hole to put things off in that technical word we use in court reporting, interlocutorial appeal. Going up to the appellate court, there's a two-part process, then there's a third-part process to the Supreme Court. It can all be glacial in terms of the amount of time that it takes, and it could push this back in a way that Donald Trump hopes it can. We'll see. But there is something really important about the way Smith is using his words in these extremely lengthy but also clear filings. For example, Tom Windham, one of the first prosecutors assigned by the Justice Department to look at the January.
It's a crisis when Carolina freezes. We're going to make sure she's unfrozen before we go back to her. Can you hear us, Carol? Can you hear us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Ahead.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah. You're good. No. You're good. We got you.
For example, you have Tom Windham, the first prosecutor assigned to this case by the Department of Justice, to look at the white-collar potential crimes of the effort to block the election and the certification, of the election on January 6th. Windham is the one writing when he takes very clear umbrage at Donald Trump's claim that this is a group of corrupt cronies, and says these are prosecutors with decades of experience who have taken an oath to the Constitution to follow the facts where they lead. Of course, I'm paraphrasing here, but I mean, you can hear kind of the grinding of teeth in that pleading, saying, you better back it off, Mr. Trump, because that's not what we are. This is not a rigged investigation. You can hear it in Molly Gaston, another very early prosecutor from the U.S. Attorney's Office, when she writes in her pleading that Donald Trump is personally responsible for what happened on January 6th. There's no fluttering or indirect or passive language. She says his actions led to the culmination of what happened in the riot on the Capitol and ultimately the violence that day. Again, I'm paraphrasing, but how much more interestingly clear is that compared to, for example, Robert Mueller's very methodical report, which had a lot of legalese and often was not declarative.
It is Wednesday, the 8th of November of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef. Precious, the little Yorkie, is our door girl, and she will be seating you directly for our especially special, daily special, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Will no one rid us of these meddlesome priests meddling with our velvety hollandaise sauce? Do not mess with the sauce. Yes, right. Okay. Some of you, not you, but some of the cooks out there are using a little bit too much starch. Be careful. Don't make your hollandaise too starchy. Okay, so, one other reminder. There's a big difference between cooking and baking, okay? Baking, you have to be exact. Cooking, pinch here, pinch there, bam. Okay. Boy, a little stiff today. Had quite a night last night. What? We keep winning. We do. How was your election night? Did a lot of your measures prevail? Now, I haven't seen whether our term limit measure has passed or not. A little harder out here in, I don't know, rural America getting immediate news. What, you mean that one-man operation at the newspaper office there? He didn't stay up all night and write the articles and keep us up to date? Come on. So, I don't know how that fared. I think that the idea, though, that as I expressed earlier, when people on the town Facebook page were saying, there's a term limit provision in our election coming up, and the knee-jerk response was, term limits on the federal level are terrible, and we don't want it on the local level. Give me a break. It's like, do you pay attention to what's happening in your city council and mayor right now? Do you know how many mayors we've gone through? and then we always have to have what's known as the old mayor come in and fill in till the next election so they can get somebody else who quits before their term is up. Give me a break. Let alone people who have sat on the council and, leapfrogged around and then die. And then they can't fill that spot. Pretty soon they're not going to have a quorum. I guess we won't have a city. And maybe that is what the plan is. Yeah, they'll be just fine until they don't get their streets swept by the street sweeper. We get a street sweeper, and you know why? Because leaves clog the storm drains, get washed into the river, clog that up, cause all sorts of organic pollution that we can't have. There is a sentiment in town, though, because there was quite a few wildcat mining operations going along for years, decades along the rivers. And, if it was up to them, just use these big old fire hoses and denude the riverbank to get the precious metals or whatever it is they're going for. Yep, they want to do that. Okay. We've even had arguments about the constitutionality of forcing people to wear seatbelts. Give me a break. Look, I'm paying for your injuries in your car, and so how about if, you take a little bit more care? You're always whining, I'm paying too much in taxes. Yeah, well, so am I. So why don't you behave like a good citizen and stop costing the rest of us money? Okay. No one ever couches it like that. Well, not always. So, it looks like, woman's health, women's right to choose, being a woman is enshrined in the Ohio Constitution. How is that? Hey, yeah. Though the Speaker of the House there did warn that, hey, this is not over. We're looking at ways so we can get back at you women. You women better look out. Okay. SCOTUS heard arguments about whether domestic abusers should be able to have an AR-15. Oh, yeah, they have a constitutional right. 2, Scalia and Alito said, Oh, I'm sorry, what's Scalia? Almost like Scalia. Thomas and Alito. I got Scalia on the brain. Anyway, Thomas and Alito both seemed, actually, an abuser should be able to have a gun. As if they might have some personal idea about why they would need it. Mm-hmm. All right, well, I don't know. I even Comey Barrett said, the guy's obviously dangerous. The test case they brought before the court that the Fifth Circuit kicked up to the Supreme Court said the Fifth Circuit Yikes, talk about extremists. This guy was like shot at people, shot at bystanders, threatened, stalked. I mean, left a paper trail, a digital trail, ballistics trail. He has a constitutional right to have a gun. You can't put me on the red card list or whatever it's called. Red flag law. You can't put a red flag law on me. So they have to now, they being SCOTUS, they have to work their way around. I think it's called the Boer decision, BOER, where you have to use the laws in 1759, I think, or maybe it was 89. But you have to use the laws that were existent then, and apparently, beating your wife and shooting her in the head with a musket was just perfectly A-okay, according to the so-called originalists that are pushing this idiocy. I love how they, you have to interpret the laws how it was then. You know what? There is any number of papers from every single one of the people involved in the making of this nation who addressed issues like these. I wish that they would just be, counted as something. Oh, if it wasn't enshrined in the Constitution, nothing else existed. Oh, man, there was the Federalist Papers, and it wasn't just the Federalist Papers either. Jeez. Even Poor Richard's Almanac addressed these issues. Give me a break. Okay, I know it was Ben Franklin, but still. And there was any number of lesser well-known pamphlets and newsletters that were going out saying, maybe we shouldn't allow just anybody to willy-nilly have a musket so they could put a musket ball through their wife's head, usually couched in property. Not the wife's property necessarily, though she was, but the potential harm to someone else's property when the musket went through her head and maybe hit somebody's cow. Can't have that. If someone's so out of control, they're going to put a musket ball through their head and hit a cow afterwards with that same musket, they should maybe not have a musket. Okay. Now we have AR-15s. All right. I didn't mean to go off on a Second Amendment issue, but it's all part of a whole, isn't it? Control our lives, and if they can't do it at the ballot, they're going to make sure they have some bullets in the gun. Trump's first idea of what he's going to do when he takes over again is to militarize everything, announce there's the Insurrection Act, because pussy-hatted women with pussy cat hats, pink hats, with little feline ears are going to go out in the streets and protest his ascent to the throne. And you can't have that. So we're going to call out the military and have martial law and go after his critics, his opponents. It'll be a real night of the long knives then, won't it? What will happen when members of the military refuse the order? So I already know how he feels about the military. I guess that's the whole idea. If you're a Vladian sort of strategist or a Stalinist like Bannon and Mike Flynn, that having a mutiny by the military, I guess that would be considered divisive in our democracy. Okay. One other pet peeve, or two other pet peeves. How is it that the same majority black Democratic districts always have the same problems year after year that prevents people from being able to cast their vote on election night? They whine that you can't have a mail-in ballot. And then when they okay, you can have a mail-in ballot, but under these restrictions. So then people show up on election night and they say, oh, well, I'm sorry, we just don't have enough ballots for you. You have to go home now. People who stood in line for 4, 6, 8 hours told to go home because we ran out of ballots, and even if we didn't, we don't have toner. So I'm just saying, maybe old Tate Reeves wouldn't be governor again right now. Sure sounds like a good old boy strategy to me that they've been doing for every election, and people fall for it. Every election. Okay. My other pet peeve is this is the first time in a long time on election night that they didn't, at least here on the West Coast, I mean for us, election night goes late into the night. We have our returns coming in, and they come in much later than what's on the East Coast. So I was a little peeved that election night results stopped at 9 o'clock here on the West Coast. At least on, well, I'm not going to watch CNN. I couldn't watch CNN. I just couldn't. Okay. So I went to MSNBC, and, I was okay with pretty much what was going on. I like Lawrence. He gave a really nice obituary memoriam for Mrs. Moynihan, 90-some-odd lady who stalwart in Democratic politics in the Eastern Seaboard, wife of Senator Moynihan. She passed. Wonderful, wonderful memorial to her. But 9 o'clock, I thought, okay, they're going to keep going live. And no, they rehashed the same stuff that happened at 6 o'clock here. How dare they? So I presumed it was because, well, Dems are winning handily again. Don't let people know about that. Okay. We can go on and on and on about all my pet peeves, but we do have a curated show for you today, and I meant to get more into it so that we could give it proper attention. But let's give it the attention it deserves right now. Okay, well, that new filing by the Jack Smith team fights back against Trump's effort to delay his trial past the election. And, boy, they're trying to throw, I like the idea of throwing not just pasta against the wall, but, the Forelli, too, and the little bow tie pasta. See if that sticks. On the rest of the menu, a black Tacoma, Washington newspaper carrier and the county sheriff reached a settlement in their controversial 2021 confrontation that was totally perpetrated by the sheriff off duty because a black guy's delivering papers, and that was suspicious. The FBI is investigating suspicious packages containing a white powder sent to over a half-dozen Seattle synagogues in the last 4 days, and a federal lawsuit denouncing the conditions at a West Virginia jail has been settled. After the break, we move to the chef's table where Cyprus has a plan for a humanitarian sea corridor to Gaza and will present it to the European Union heads of state. And a French prosecutor says a link to Russia is responsible for the dozens of Stars of David stenciled around Paris. Everything goes back to Russia, okay? Let us not forget. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. Across the page to the left from that chat room link, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, is the link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, it really does help us. And thank you to those of you who have done so. When we get the Patreon payout, it's so heartening because it puts quite a big dent in our ISP bill. And that's important. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing right now. So thank you for your generosity in allowing us to fulfill our civic duty as the founders originally intended so many, many years ago. They did, too. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, Mastodon, Spoutable, and Blue Sky, you can do so by going to @Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of those. Thank you, Tom. You can also follow me on Twitter, Mastodon, Spoutable, Blue Sky, what else? Tumblr, Instagram, Facebook, etc., by going to @JusticePutnam or simply Justice Putnam. You know how to do that. And I'll tell you why it might be a good idea to follow me on social media, because I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Kos 10 minutes before showtime, and that's where the actual reportage is, and that's important. It really is. If you would like to follow the show on Twitter, because it's just a placemat, I'm going to make it more activated on these other platforms. Give me time. You can do so on Twitter @CookbookWest, and please do pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, TuneIn, iTunes, wherever podcasts can be found. You just can't find them on Stitcher anymore. You can find them on YouTube. It's still on YouTube. Though I have to admit, every now and then when I put in, even a labor history clip, and there's like a union song, Russia always kicks it out and says it violates our whatever they have. A union song. And I'm just talking about 15 to 17 seconds of it. Not enough. YouTube kicks it all out because Russia complained about a union song. Okay. All right, let us now dig into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And it comes to us, it does. It comes to us by the staff at the Seattle Times. Pierce County has agreed to pay more than $500,000 to settle a lawsuit brought by a black newspaper carrier over a controversial 2021 confrontation with Sheriff Ed Troyer. The settlement, filed in U.S. District Court for Western Washington, ends the long-running federal lawsuit filed by Cedric Altheimer, who was detained and frisked after Troyer triggered a massive police response on January 27th of 2021 by calling an emergency dispatcher and repeatedly stating that Altheimer was threatening to kill him. The guy went Karen. Wow. Now, Troyer, who is white, I know it's shocking, walked back the threat claims when questioned by a Tacoma police officer, according to the officer's incident report and later sworn testimony. That discrepancy spurred calls for Troyer's resignation and led the state AG's office to prosecute Troyer last year on misdemeanor charges of false reporting and making a false statement to a civil servant. Troyer denied that he changed his story and disputed the Tacoma police account as inaccurate. After a high-profile trial, a 6-person jury in December of 2022 acquitted Troyer of all charges. Altheimer's civil lawsuit had been on hold pending the outcome of the criminal case and resumed this year with a trial scheduled for January. Under the settlement agreement, Pierce County will pay $500,015 plus reasonable attorney's fees and costs to be determined by the federal court. The settlement, filed on Friday last, states that it was reached to resolve the case without the risk and expense of a trial, and was not an admission of wrongdoing. The settlement amount was far less than the $5 million sought by Altheimer in an initial tort claim filed against Pierce County in June of 2021. Vonda Sargent, an attorney representing Altheimer, said the lower court settlement was agreed to because her client faced a crisis. A fire that recently destroyed the apartment where he, his partner, and children were living. Really? How convenient. Before the settlement, court records show the two sides had been battling in recent weeks over whether Pierce County had turned over all the documents sought by Altheimer's attorneys in the case. Troyer and his attorney did not immediately respond to a request for comment, because when have they ever? Adam Faber, a spokesperson for Pierce County Prosecutor's Office, confirmed that the county had agreed to pay the settlement, including the legal costs, which have yet to be finalized, and he had no additional comment. The confrontation that spurred the lawsuit occurred in the early morning hours of January 27th of 2021, when Altheimer, then age 24, was delivering newspapers on his regular route in a quiet Tacoma neighborhood. Troyer, driving his personal unmarked SUV, started following Altheimer, later saying he'd seen a car driving suspiciously near his home and thought it might be someone prowling homes. In an interview and later at the trial, Altheimer said he approached the vehicle between deliveries and asked the driver if he was a cop and if he was following him because he was black. He said Troyer never identified himself and accused him of being a porch pirate. After driving off, Altheimer said Troyer followed him again. The two wound up in a standoff after 2 a.m., facing one another in their cars and flashing their lights. Troyer called an emergency dispatcher, saying Altheimer was threatening to kill him. Given the alleged threat to the county's top law enforcement officer, dispatchers issued a high-priority officer needs help response, causing a county-wide alert that sent more than 40 police cars racing toward the scene. After Tacoma police arrived, most of the additional officers were called off. Altheimer was surrounded by police, some with guns out, and was ordered to show his hands. He was questioned but not arrested after police saw the newspapers in his car, and he explained his newspaper delivery routine. At the scene, a visibly upset Altheimer demanded to know what was going to be done about Troyer, calling in the police response. Altheimer and his attorneys have argued that the incident easily could have turned deadly, do you think? And accused Troyer in the lawsuit of racial animus and reckless disregard for Mr. Altheimer's civil rights, and in spite of the fact that Altheimer confronted him numerous times while he was trying to deliver his papers. Troyer claims he had no idea that Altheimer was black. More staff at the Seattle Times brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Cormac Lee was suspicious of the white envelope delivered to his Seward Park Synagogue on Friday afternoon, given that the name of the house of worship was misspelled, and the two return addresses, one in Jerusalem, the other in Seattle, was clearly bogus. Despite the red flags, Lee, the 23-year-old office manager for the Sephardic Bekur Holem congregation, decided to open the package because he was in a rush to get ready for Shabbat and did not want to leave any mail unopened heading into the weekend. In any other setting, I would not have opened the package. I would have called security, said Lee, who interned last year for the Israeli parliament and studied counterterrorism before graduating from Whitman College in May. This is a synagogue. This is the one place people should feel safe. It's a place of community, a place of worship. When he opened the envelope, a white crystalline substance blew into his face. Lee called 911, locked himself in the package in his office until police arrived around 4 p.m. Over the next 2.5 hours, Seattle police and fire personnel responded to a second synagogue, the Congregation Ezra Besaroth, as well as Hillel at the University of Washington, over reports of similar packages, though the package sent to the Jewish Campus Organization did not contain any white powder. Monday evening, Seattle fire crews responded to yet another report of a hazardous substance at a fourth Jewish institution, Congregation Sherei Talua Lubavitch in northeast Seattle. I apologize for all the mispronunciations. The Seattle Fire Department asked people to avoid the area while they investigated. While the substances would all prove harmless, the suspicious packages were especially frightening against the backdrop of the Israel-Hamas war. The FBI is now leading an investigation and is working to determine how many letters were sent, who was responsible for sending them, and why. Of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A lawsuit filed by inmates who described conditions at a southern West Virginia jail as inhumane has been settled, a federal judge said yesterday, Tuesday, a week after a magistrate judge said some records in the suit had been intentionally destroyed. U.S. District Judge Frank Volk said in a court filing that the plaintiffs and defendants have reached a resolution of this matter. The filing said the parties believe a limited class action settlement fund must be formulated. Volk scheduled a status conference for Thursday tomorrow. The lawsuit filed last year on behalf of current and former inmates of the Southern Regional Jail in Beaver referenced the lack of access to water and food at the facility, as well as overcrowding and fights that were allowed to continue until someone was injured. The lawsuit named Betsy Jividan, the state corrections commissioner who resigned in August of 2022, State Department of Homeland Security Secretary Jeff Sandy, who retired in July, Division of Corrections and Rehabilitation Executive Officer Brad Douglas, who was fired last week, Assistant Corrections Commissioner William Marshall, who has been appointed commissioner, and former Southern Regional Jail Superintendent, Mike Francis. Well, that brings us to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
We're the Goo Goo Dolls. We're fortunate that our daughters have what they need to grow and learn. But that isn't the case for nearly 13 million kids in the U.S. that struggle with hunger.
Childhood hunger is a heartbreaking reality that Feeding America is working to change. Each year, the Feeding America network of food banks rescues billions of pounds of good food that would have gone to waste and provides it to families and children in need.
You can help kids in need in your community by visiting feedingamerica.org.
Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Can you own a machine gun? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. The first answer? No! Because the 1934 National Firearms Act prohibits the sale and ownership of machine guns. The second answer? We'll see. We'll see involves bump stocks. Remember October 2017 in Las Vegas when a man killed 58 people and wounded 500 more in a matter of minutes? By himself, thanks to a bump stock? An attachment that allows semi-automatic rifles to fire in sustained rapid bursts like a machine gun. After that massacre, the Trump administration issued a regulation banning bump stocks, and lawsuits ensued, with most of the legal attacks on the ban failing. But recently, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that the ban was illegal, and the Supreme Court has agreed to decide the issue. Opponents of the regulation claim that the executive branch has no authority to unilaterally ban bump stocks. The Biden administration counters that the regulation is consistent with the 1934 law. Opponents note that 42 states have no assault weapons ban, and 520,000 bump stocks were purchased during the 9 years they were for sale. Of note, this case does not involve the Second Amendment. The court is not being asked in this case to rule that you have a constitutional right to own a machine gun, but rather that bump stocks should remain legal unless and until Congress acts. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
You're listening to the American Democracy Minute, keeping your government buy-in for the people. Far-right activists pushing fringe conspiracy theories pressured red state legislatures and election officials to pull out of the Electronic Registration Information Center, or ERIC. But proposed election integrity alternatives fall far short of ERIC and are likely to be more expensive. In the past year, Texas, Florida, Ohio, Missouri, Virginia, West Virginia, Iowa, Alabama, and Louisiana pulled out after activists convinced state officials that ERIC was somehow tainted by liberal funder George Soros. Most of these states still haven't developed an alternative, leaving voter rolls less accurate and vulnerable to mistakes or fraud. At least two alternative computer services, Eagle AI and Fractal, are being touted by right-wing activists, but neither appear to have been adopted by state officials. Alabama announced its Alabama Voter Integrity Database, or AVID, in September. AVID is somewhat similar to ERIC, but relies on comparing data with only a handful of states. One election expert told NPR that the interstate agreements made by Alabama and other states don't include critical DMV data. Another expert from the Alliance for Securing Democracy, writing in the Fulcrum, also raised questions about encryption of data during storage and transit. Shortcomings aside, the actual cost of reinventing the election integrity wheel has yet to be seen. We have more at AmericanDemocracyMinute.org. I'm Brian Beal.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1897. That was the day that Dorothy Day, a leader of the Catholic worker movement, was born in Brooklyn, New York. As a young girl, her family moved to San Francisco. Her father lost his job as a sports writer due to the devastating earthquake of 1906, and the family relocated again to Chicago. In 1932, she met Peter Morin, and together they founded the Catholic Worker Movement, a faith-based social justice effort. The Catholic workers opened what they called houses of hospitality to serve those in need. Dorothy helped to co-found The Catholic Worker, a monthly newspaper that became a voice for poor and working people. While writing for the paper, Dorothy traveled and visited with some of the most exploited workers in the country. She talked with migrant agricultural workers in California and was arrested for supporting the United Farm Workers in 1973. In 1940, she visited the Hooverville encampment in Seattle, Washington. Dorothy's reporting vividly demonstrated how her faith informed her activism. She wrote, quote, "The rain poured down. Underneath was mud, ankle deep, and the long lane that cut between the rows of shacks reflected the gray clouds in its pools. But Christ is there. I thought sadly, there in the mud, in the shacks with his poor, with them he is trying to find a place to lay his head. With them he hungers, and with them he suffers fatigue of body and soul. Behold, O God, our Redeemer, and look upon the face of thy Christ. There in the dumps, among the creatures who still are men. Have pity on them and on us, who permit such things to be." Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. We always begin, whether from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 40 degrees Fahrenheit under cloudy conditions that will give way to generally sunny skies in the afternoon with highs topping out around 58 degrees, winds light and variable, clear to partly cloudy overnight with lows in the mid to low 30s. Winds light and variable, then cloudy skies tomorrow with highs in the mid-50s, winds light and variable. Pollen is rated as none here in our little village of Rogue River. The air quality index for the region is in the good range at 43 parts per million, and oh my, that daytime UV index is low and has notched down to level 1. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.44 inches. Visibility is up to 8 miles, and relative humidity is at 100%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and that is the Weather Underground. London is 52 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 56 degrees with light rain. Rome is 61 degrees and clear, though they are under a potential disruption because of rain. Bagram is 52 degrees and cloudy. Kyiv is 46 with light drizzle. Hong Kong is 78 degrees and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 60 and mostly cloudy. Melbourne, Victoria, Australia is 60 degrees and mostly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 56 and sunny. Chicago, Illinois is 52 degrees and cloudy. And New York, New York is 48 degrees Fahrenheit and fair. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Staff at the World Desk of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Cyprus will present its plan for a humanitarian sea corridor to Gaza when the Cypriot president meets with other EU heads of state in Paris at an international donor conference for the besieged Palestinian enclave on November 9th. An official said yesterday, Tuesday. A government spokesman from Cyprus told reporters the initiative to ship aid from the eastern Mediterranean island will be discussed at length during the conference, which will also seek to address Gaza's pressing needs, including water, electricity, and fuel supply. Last week, senior UN officials said the average Palestinian in Gaza was living on 2 pieces of bread a day, while only 1 of 3 water supply lines from Israel was operational. More than 1.5 million Palestinians have been displaced in Gaza by the Israeli offensive launched in the wake of the October 7th Hamas massacre, which killed 1,400 people. The Cypriot president said the initiative aims for a sustained, secure, high-volume flow of humanitarian assistance to Gaza in the immediate, medium, and long term. President Christodoulides said his government is working with neighboring countries, including Israel, Egypt, Jordan, and the Palestinian Authority, as well as the U.S., France, the EU, and the UN, to set the initiative into motion.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Even more staff at the World Desk of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. 2 couples who stenciled dozens of blue stars of David on buildings in Paris and 2 of its suburbs last week are linked by a third party living abroad, the Paris prosecutor said yesterday, Tuesday. The link was based on a telephone conversation by one couple in Russian, a statement said. At this stage, it is not excluded that the markings of the blue stars of David in the Paris region were made at the explicit demand of a person living abroad, prosecutor Laurie Bucau said. An investigating judge was taking over the case as much to identify the authors as to analyze the intentions that guided the operation. Sounds like psyops to me, but that's just me. The war between Israel and Hamas has led to at least 1,040 known acts of anti-Semitism in France, but the prosecutor's office investigating the appearance of 60 blue stars, similar to those on the Israeli flag, has yet to conclude whether those who put up the stencils had anti-Semitic intent. Surveillance video showed a man and a woman marking buildings with a third person photographing them on walls in Paris and the suburbs of the Saint-Denis and Hauts-de-Seine, the statement said. The couple fled France the following day. The statement said that 4 days earlier, a separate couple from Moldova and lacking proper papers to remain in France were detained after being seen stenciling a star on a Paris building, then held for expulsion from the country. They declared they were acting under orders from a third person and for remuneration, the prosecutor's statement said, adding that an examination of their telephone revealed a conversation in Russian, confirming the claim, and many Moldovans speak Russian. Telephone investigation allows us to think that the two couples were in relation with the same third person or party, the statement said. It did not indicate whether the nationality of the third party was known, but you know they know. All right, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know that Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Metro Shrimp and Grist Thursdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme aux langues de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.